Zonta International once again presents the Remarkable Women Powerful Stories webinar series, and I welcome you to my conversation today with Renee Powers, a feminist, a speaker, an entrepreneur, a book enthusiast, academic by trade, and founder of the Feminist Book Club. I'm Lynn Foley, and truly privileged to speak with the remarkable women who are generous with their stories and their time. As we begin, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also pay that respect to any First Nations people present. Zonta International is a leading global organisation working together to build a better world for women and girls. So Renee, I warmly welcome you to our conversation today. As we begin, I thought I'd give our audience just a short introduction to you, and you can let the rest unfold as we have our conversation. Renee is a fan of stories, which is her polite way of saying she is incredibly nosy. But this is ultimately what drives her interest in literature and interviews. In 2018, she founded the Feminist Book Club, a monthly subscription box and community that highlights the feminist book and products from women and queer-owned businesses. She also hosts the corresponding podcast, Feminist Book Club, the podcast, which speaks to authors, writers, and readers about the intersection of feminism and literature. You can tune into any major podcast platform or on the FBC website. Renee has a range of places she's worked in the past, and they will all be revealed as we have our conversation today. And in particular, is a proud PhD dropout. And I'm sure we'll hear more about why that is so. So it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you today, Renee.
It is an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. So let's get going. As we begin our conversation, I'm really keen to hear about where your story began and how your upbringing has influenced the woman you are today.
Yeah, I love this question. And I think that's so important to go back to the beginning for all of us to see how we've all kind of emerged. I am the only child. My parents divorced when I was 12, and I was primarily raised by my mom. And she was a single mom, still is, for most of my life from 12 on. And I grew up in a small town in Indiana, about 90 miles from Chicago. So Chicago was what we called the big city, but it was fairly small where I grew up. Public school, I was one of those, what they would call us gifted and talented kids, but it was just that, I identify as a recovering overachiever now. So it was always trying to be the smartest in class, trying to earn all of the awards and accolades. And that ended up, it wasn't until I was in college and undergrad, I went to an all-women's Catholic school called St. Mary's. It's the sister school of the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. And I went there because my mom wanted to go there, but due to circumstances, she wasn't able to attend college. So I was the first in my family to go to college, and I went to this all-women's school. And I ended up taking an introduction to women's studies course to fulfill a humanities credit. I had never really understood the term feminism or what it meant to be feminist until I started in this class. And I'll tell you, it was like putting on glasses for the first time. I could see things clearly for the first time. I could see power structures. I could see the influences of how I was raised, how we were socialized, why it's important for me to be in this women's college and what that means to education and society as a whole. I think that decision to take that one course to fulfill humanities credit, I can say that that's the reason I am doing what I do now. I ended up designing my own major in women's studies and gender studies because we didn't have it at the time. It was 2000. I started college in 2004, and it wasn't a degree offered at the time. So I had to design my own major, which was a lot of fun. And I can happily say now that there is a gender studies degree at St. Mary's, which I'm very proud of. And one of my life goals is actually to contribute to, start, found an endorsed, endowed chair of gender studies at that school. I think that would be so wonderful. But anyways, so I graduated with my degree in gender studies. I went into politics and hated every minute of it. We can talk more about that. And then I went back to school. And I spent about 8 years in grad school before starting Feminist Book Club.
Whereabouts are you based these days, Renee?
I have ended up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's the traditional land of the Dakota people.
Wow. So I think when we first met, we talked about the contrasting climate between where I'm sitting today in Brisbane in Queensland, Australia, and the weather here. We're in the middle of winter, as you can see, but winter here is very mild in comparison to the winters that you might have in Minnesota, from what I've heard.
Yes.
Absolutely.
They are long.
So, and I like your the dream. I think it's so important for people to have dreams, isn't it? You have that dream to maybe found a chair in gender studies at that university where you were. It is through those founders of chairs that I think universities take notice and students start to take notice and become part of those studies. And the more we get people interested in gender studies, and the more that perhaps we have young men who enter those courses, the better we will be, because I have a view gender equity is both men and women's work, all people's work, regardless of gender.
And I am happy to say that because it was the sister school of a co-ed school at Notre Dame, we did have both male and female students join our gender studies classes at St. Mary's, which was always exciting because Notre Dame, I think to this day, doesn't have a gender studies program. And so they would have to come across to the sister school to take those classes. And yes, there were some, male identified folks in my classes, which was really, really exciting for me.
It is indeed. It is indeed. And certainly interesting how you're awakened to women's studies. You're not the first guest I've spoken to who had an awakening to feminism or gender studies or women's studies or the gender equity movement through that luck or the fortune of choosing a particular subject at university for other reasons. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so in the break from grad school that you've already referred to, you worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign and eventually found your way back to grad school. You also worked for senators, congresswomen, and men within government. What did you take away from those experiences in government and politics more broadly?
Well, politics and government are two completely different animals. And I found that I felt more effective in government, but I enjoyed politics a little bit more. And I think that what I take away from that is that individual voices do matter, especially in a democracy. We may feel jaded at times. We may feel like we're screaming into the void. We see 24-hour news networks and we're overwhelmed by how much better it can be. And what I can tell you, and I called myself the customer service rep for the federal government because I was the person that answered the phones at the district office of a congresswoman's office. And I got everything. I never knew what was going to be on the other end of the line when I would answer the phone. And I can tell you, there is somebody listening. And that person, me at the time, there are ways to get those messages back to our leaders. And I would say that when there are major movements, so at the time cap and trade was a big issue. This was 2008. It was the first year of Obama's presidency, and I guess it was 2009. I can tell you that the activists shut down our phone lines, and we paid attention. They had robocalls that would just constantly call all of our phone lines. And we were like, we got to turn off. We know what they're saying. They're all saying the same thing. They're all reading from the same script. There's a lot of people in this district that care about this issue. We have to listen to it. It's disruptive. in the best way. And even if you don't agree with it, you have to kind of appreciate the effort that goes into disrupting somebody's work day in the name of what you
Yep.
think is justice. And I think that's something that I take away from it, is like just being a squeaky wheel gets the grease, and just being persistent, and don't underestimate. That's my favorite quote. It's a Margaret Mead quote. Never underestimate the power of people who come together. It's the only thing that has ever changed the world. It's just a few people coming together to try to make a difference. It works. It absolutely works. So that's what I take away from politics and government. The positive parts, the negative parts is like, yeah, it makes a difference. It can take a really long time. And in the meantime, a lot of people get lost. So you got to take the good with the bad.
What was it that caused you to walk away from that sort of work?
I felt that I didn't know enough about a wide enough variety of government platforms and government agencies, and policy. I'm not a policy person. I'm an advocate, I'm an activist. And so I just felt undereducated, and there's got to be somebody better for this role than me, because I would talk to constituents and I would say, yeah, I don't really know what you're talking about. That's not my field. You have to be a generalist if you're going to work in government or policy, and I was not. And so I walked away from it, first because I didn't like the work-life balance. I remember taking a conference call during a hair appointment, because it was the only time, right, that the whole staff could get on a call with the congresswoman, and it was just absurd. Like, nobody should ever need to do that. So I went looking for something that I thought might be better. And that's how I ended up in academia, thinking I could make my own schedule and research what I want and be, focused instead of being a generalist. And yeah, that's why I went back to school.
So in that going back to school piece, I know when we talked initially, you described yourself to me as a PhD dropout, and you also have that in your bio. Might you be willing to share with me how that happened and how that, I guess, caused you or provided that platform to where you are so far?
Yeah. I say that I am a proud PhD dropout because there is so much shame that those of us who drop out of graduate programs are kind of socialized to feel. In academia, in the US, especially in PhD and terminal degrees, you're married to that work, right? It's a silo, and it's really hard to see outside of it, especially when you're in it. And so I use that phrase PhD dropout as an opportunity to say there's something on the other side of your graduate program. It's not going to be a be all end all. I ended up in and also, like, my experience is my experience. It is not everybody's experience. Some people really, really enjoy their graduate experience. I loved my master's experience. I thought that was fantastic. If I could do that every year, it'd be great. But my PhD experience was a different department, different university, different city. And it wasn't very supportive. And I never kind of found my place in that department. And I couldn't see a future in which I would find my place within academia. After 6 years in the PhD program, I decided there was an opportunity for me to move to Minneapolis. I was living in Chicago at the time. And so I decided, well, I'm going to take this opportunity to move to Minneapolis and see what's next. And at that point, I had finished my comprehensive exams. And so I was considered ABD, all but dissertation. I had proposed my dissertation project 3 times and failed every time with very little constructive feedback. And so I was frustrated, I was tired, and at that point it kind of felt like hazing. And I wasn't willing to play the game anymore. You know, I was in my 30s. I was feeling like I can't be a student anymore. Like, I'm tired. I can make my own path here. And so I ended up picking up a part-time job with Stitch Fix, which I'm still a huge fan of Stitch. This shirt is actually from Stitch Fix. Like I'm still a big fan of the company,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I appreciate, you know, what they were trying to do in tech and entrepreneurship, and the founder, I was lucky enough to hear her speak, and she's incredible. Her name's Katrina Lake. I learned a lot just being a part-time stylist and seeing kind of the inside of building a business, and running a scrappy tech-centered startup. And, you know, everything I had done up to this point, I was studying gender, I was studying technology, I was studying media and new media, especially. I was running an online blogging community. I had a podcast that had grown out of a failed dissertation project. And I just thought, like, I'm going to start, you know, in a Facebook group, reading fun feminist books with my friends because I'm tired of reading school books. And that's how Feminist Book Club started. It was really just me and my friends reading in a Facebook group, and it was inspired by the work I was seeing done at Stitch Fix to kind of grow gradually and become a subscription service.
It's an amazing story when you see it as in the light of which you are, and you're only partway through your story. Like you are where you're at, aren't you? And there's a lot more of your story to come. And I think it's a salient learning for everyone that failure is only a learning for success in the future. And if we see things like dropping out of a PhD or any university study as a failure, like a life failure, and that's it, then we're misguided. I think it's how do we ensure that all people who go through that experience don't feel that failure is the end of the world even for them.
I agree.
It's a success, isn't it?
It is. And I think that women are particularly prone to see failure as a failure, where men are socialized to fail forward. Like, oh, that company just went bankrupt. No, well, I'm gonna start another one. You know, women don't aren't socialized to have that muscle, that failure muscle, because that's what all it is, right? It's just resilience and getting back up, dusting yourself, and trying again. And it's something that, you know, I'm hoping to kind of demonstrate with my work too, is that, again, like you said, Lynn, failure is not the end of a story. It can be the beginning of a story.
I wonder if some of that comes off the good girl thing, the good girl image. I talk a lot about good girl, socialized to be a good girl. So good girls are described in a certain way and constructed in a certain way. And even more so in my generation, which is a little different to yours, that socializing of the good girl image and busting out of that and going, well, yeah, every time something goes wrong or I fail at it, that's just a success waiting to happen sometime in the future. And I've learned something a bit more about the future. And we've got to remind ourselves of that when we're so socialized to seeing failure as a big deal. Even the word is can create a reaction in your body if you let it. It's interesting. So through this Feminist Book Club, and it's a fascinating place, and you and I had a very interesting conversation about books recently. Through the book club and associated podcasts, you're using your voice through the power of books. So what drew you to this literature? You've explained that what drew you there, you wanted to read some fun books and you wanted to see what women were writing about. But talk more about how that developed, or how that I suppose release from university study took you further forward.
Yeah, a lot of what I read in grad school was written by dead old white men. I mean, not necessarily in the gender studies courses, though there were dead old white men in the gender studies courses too. I can tell you the first time I remember reading a woman that was assigned to me, and I was a sophomore in high school. So I was 16 years old. It was the first time I remember being assigned a woman writer, and it was Dorothy Parker. It was for a poetry unit in my English literature class. And I remember, and we got to choose a poet that we wanted to do a project on. And I didn't know, I didn't recognize any of them. And so my teacher, Mrs. Kaiser, shout out to Mrs. Kaiser, she said, Renee, I think you'd really like Dorothy Parker. And I don't know what that says about me as a 16-year-old, because if you know anything about Dorothy Parker, she's sarcastic. She's a rule breaker. She was writing in the 20s and 30s, and she was writing about sex and drugs and alcohol and relationships and kind of living a hedonist life. And I loved it. She had a foul mouth and she was smoking and drinking. It was great. As a 16-year-old, I just thought she was the best thing I'd ever read. And to this day, she's one of my favorite authors. And it lit me up. I enjoyed that project so much. I enjoyed learning about her, reading about her. I've read, biography after biography about her to this day. And I want to be Mrs. Kaiser. I want to put the book in someone's hand and say, this is for you. This is your story. You can see yourself in this book, it may not necessarily be a story whose identity completely aligns with you, but you're going to find something in it that resonates and makes you feel seen, because who doesn't want to feel seen in the stories that we witness, right? So I think that what is so important is using literature as a tool towards belonging, and using literature as a tool to deliberately make yourself uncomfortable. We are so conditioned to read white Western men's stories, and that's what we now deem as kind of the default. But what if we shifted the default to a different lens, right? So what if we shifted the default to a disabled Black queer woman's story? What would the world look like if we saw the world through her eyes as opposed to through T.S. Eliot's eyes again, Ernest Hemingway, yawn over it. And so I think that literature becomes a vehicle for empathy, for compassion, for justice, and for just getting outside your comfort zone in a really, really safe way, right? Because even with our e-readers now, nobody needs to know what we're reading.
No.
So you can read smut on the bus if you really wanted to, and you know what? That still counts.
and with these little devils.
That's right. Audiobooks are reading, and if you think differently, get out of my DMs. That is the wrong opinion.
Some of my friends tell me I'm not reading because I'm an Audible book. I think I've almost moved totally to Audible books these days, whether they be professional reading. Professional reading or fun reading, and which professional reading can be fun too, but the professional or the fiction reading, it's interesting, isn't it? I think I might have interrupted you in your train of thought then, but it is that piece about putting the book in someone else's hands. So yes. I'm going to skip over a question and come back to it in a moment, but following on that thread of putting books in the hands and reading through the lens of other people, what do you believe school and university curricula and libraries look like with women, people with a disability, people from diverse cultures, and the LGBTQIA+ people at the centre, or the queer people at the centre? What does that look like when that's truly happening in the school and university space?
I wish I knew. I've never seen it. But I do think that it is books are deeply political, and we're seeing across the US these book bans, and there is nothing democratic about banning literature. I think that if we decenter power and privilege in our libraries, in our universities, on our class syllabi, we are going to reach so many more people. by presenting a monolithic experience that is the hegemonic, masculine, white, Western, able-bodied, Christian, English-speaking, et cetera, et cetera. When we center that, we lose 95% of people these days. And I'm right now, I am particularly interested in disabled writers, because becoming disabled is a minority class that any of us can enter at any point and likely will. And so what does it look like when the world is accessible to everyone, starting with folks with disabilities? It just elevates the world for the rest of us. It elevates access for everyone. And I think that you could take any minority, any body, right, and say, when we design a world, a class, a curriculum, a library, stories, media around this identity, everyone benefits. Meanwhile, I feel isolated 95% of the time that I'm watching TV or reading books by men, or sitting in a boardroom or sitting in a business meeting. I'm so tired, right, of being the only woman, the only young woman, the only like kind of hyper feminine woman in this room. Can you imagine the world, the opportunities that would proliferate if we started with education and providing resources for everybody else, not just white boys?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the Zonta Club I'm a member of a couple of years back had a writer in residence and worked with a class of young people in a primary school in the city of Toowoomba, where I spend some of my time. And it's a very large refugee population, particularly from Africa and the Middle East in our city. And this book was written with the writer in residence with the 9-year-olds. And I wish I had a copy with me. I would show it to you, but it's been written by them about who they are. And the artwork then done by the art designer represents them, represents who they are. And there's these gorgeous little semi-abstract paintings of children of color and children with different hair. And when the story is read to those children, they just light up because the story is about them, written by them. And that power of literature, when it's created, supported by a writer, of course, and supported by a designer, but created by those 9-year-olds, it's very, very powerful experience.
It's magical. That is magic.
And then now we have quite a lot of books left, and whenever I'm around in a school doing work, I gift them one of the books, because it's yet another book to add to that library. So we have a long way to go, don't we, in our world of school and university curricula, let alone in the libraries, to ensure that we have a range of books that makes literature accessible to everyone. Absolutely. So how do you describe the change you're making and the legacy you're creating through your book club and podcasts at this stage? I'll put you on the spot and ask you, how do you describe the change you're making and the legacy you wish to create? You're already creating, I should say.
Thank you. I feel that Feminist Book Club is that squeaky wheel. I want to be the squeaky wheel that makes change and not just in schools and curricula. We don't focus on children's literature. We focus on adult literature. But the structures of publishing right now are not in our favor. And I like to think that we are, as a book influencer, we are putting our dollars where it matters to us. And that's by prioritizing voices of women and prioritizing voices of women of color in particular. I just bought books today. I bought 200 copies of Well-Read Black Girl, edited by Gloria Edom. And I hope that $4,000 purchase says to the publisher, Penguin Random House, we want to see more of this. We are buying this. And I'm buying this because I just sold 200 copies of it, right? And I need to fulfill those orders. We've got an audience that wants to read these stories. The more we buy these books, the more we get them from our libraries, because libraries track that too and share it with publishing companies. I think the more likely publishers are going to start paying attention that, oh, there is a market for this. Oh, and I think we're seeing it in media too, you know, that Squid Games was such a huge moment in English speaking media in the US particularly. I think it told streaming companies and production companies, oh, Americans are willing to read subtitles. That opens up a whole new market. And I think that when we put our dollars where it counts, when we use, you know, our wallets to say, I want to read more literature like this, I want to watch more media like this, that's what makes people pay attention. That's what makes the powers that be pay attention. And so we're still seeing, you know, so much marketing money being thrown behind the usual suspects. So we occasionally get the PR package or the marketing package of smaller, quote unquote, smaller authors, debut authors, women of color, where they are putting a little bit of money behind those titles, but not in the same way that they are your John Grishams and your Stephen Kings and your James Pattersons.
And Lee Child.
Yeah, exactly.
And or if you're a celebrity writing a memoir.
Right.
So the rest of the money goes in the celebrity space for the memoir, and they come out so regularly, don't they? It reminds me of the music industry. The more that we listen these days to artists, the more that those artists will get the next deal to publish. But of course, in the music industry, it's gone rogue as well, hasn't it?
Yes.
Because artists can self-record and publish pretty easily these days and get noticed in other ways as well. Okay, so moving on, the future path to gender equality. Of course, we all know that gender equity and gender equality are two different expressions and they have different meanings. But to get us to that nirvana of gender equality, equity matters. And that's what you've been talking about so far through this podcast, is that gender equity, giving more to people to get them to start on the starting blocks equally. That's my short definition of it. And it seems to me that a lot of the work you're doing is in that space for women in particular, but also for the other groups that you've mentioned, disability, etc. So what's your view on the path forward and improving the representation for all people, women, diverse cultural backgrounds, disability, people of colour, etc.? What can I do? What can other people listening today do to do that, make a difference for one person, which then eventually, as Margaret Mead says, is getting a group together to do it?
So you're asking me to solve
No,
gender issues?
Only part of it.
Got you.
Well, together we could do that, However, what I'm saying is, what's your view on that? What are the things that I could, because after all, most of us can only do something individually to start with, or in a group. Like Zonta works really hard in that space, so many of us are in that to be that group to make a difference. So, just share some of your views on that path forward, because we have a long way to go.
Yes, we do. I'm going to share my views by lifting up an organization that's doing something very cool. This summer, we have an intern with Feminist Book Club. Her name is Marvelous. She is marvelous. She is a student at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. And Macalester has one of the coolest programs I have ever been a part of. They have a very strong entrepreneurship kind of ethos in their university. Kind of all the students kind of have that entrepreneurial bent to them. and it's kind of built into their curriculum. It's a liberal arts school. So Macalester works with small businesses and startups in the Twin Cities to place interns in these businesses. But it's not just any intern. It's not just, Joe Schmo from a wealthy suburb. It is particularly students who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to take an unpaid internship. And Macalester then provides room and board and a stipend for them. So if they have to work, non-traditional students typically have to work a side gig or a full-time job and then go to school at night. This is allowing those students to have those opportunities to do a quote unquote unpaid internship, because my bootstrap company would not be able to pay for a full-time intern for the summer, but Macalester is bankrolling it. So it's a benefit to both of us. I just think it is the most incredible opportunity. There are, I think, 20 or 25 students from the college that are throughout the Twin Cities at different startups. I benefit from it. I get a young, interesting voice, and she's so smart. We're getting so much benefit out of working with her for 3 months this summer, and she's getting professional experience and a paycheck. I just think that those are the kinds of programs where it's good for everybody.
Yes.
The position, the structure of power there is Macalester College, and they have the coffers to do this. They've got the budget to do something like this. And if you've got the budget to do something like that, if you're a structure, an organization, I just think that is one way to use your privilege in a way that makes so much difference in my life, in her life, in the life of our business. It's going to have a ripple effect for decades. Just this one thing, just giving this one person a stipend this summer. It's incredible.
And that's a piece to remember, isn't it? It's often we make a difference one person at a time.
Yes.
And one person at a time is as important as 20 or 50 or 70 or 80 people at a time, making that difference one person at a time. And that matters. And that the gender equity, never losing sight of equity, giving more so that people can start equally.
Yes. If you've
so important.
If you've got it, give it away.
Absolutely. That's my motto as well these days. So who's been your most powerful mentor or role model? And what have you learned?
I have what I call a dream team of advisors. Do I know any of them? Not really. But they're people I look up to. I've already mentioned Katrina Lake, the founder and former CEO of Stitch Fix. I just really admire what she does. I take in a lot of interviews. I read a lot of interviews. I listen to a lot of interviews with her. I'm proud to say that Jane Fonda does know who I am, and she's one of my dream team mentors. I've met her a couple of times. She did a book club event with us for her work with Greenpeace. She wrote a book called What Can I Do? About climate change. Excellent book. All of her books are fantastic. I just think that she is an incredible role model. And I really, really look up to her and the work that she has done over the course of her career. Long, storied, incredible career. Brene Brown is also, I've got bones to pick with her. And I think that, nobody's perfect. But I really dig the way that she uses research-based data to basically share with people how not to be an asshole. She's got all of the research to back it up. How to be a better person. Here's all of my data. She is kind of the queen of storytelling from empirical data. And I really look up to her for that. And then Adrienne Marie Brown is an activist and writer. She wrote the book Emergent Strategy and the book Pleasure Activism. And those are two books that I reference all of the time. And just whenever she is doing an online workshop or something, I'm always going to be learning from her. Yeah, that's off the top of my head. Those are some of my dream team. What are they, like fantasy football, but this is like my
Yes.
fantasy board of directors.
Yes. It's the people you would invite to dinner. If
Absolutely.
you could invite anyone to dinner, who would you invite to dinner?
Yeah, this would be my business dinner I'd want to have with these people.
I'd have Jane Fonda around the table. I must admit, I became a devotee of Grace and Frankie, and watched every single episode as soon as it dropped. And maybe that's just because I'm not quite in their age group, but descending or ascending to that age group quite quickly.
Exactly.
Ascending to that age group. I'm working on ascending. So, what's your greatest gift? What's your greatest leadership gift?
What is my greatest gift? I'm a connector. I like bringing people together. I like cultivating spaces where we can learn from one another. And I think I'm really good at it. And I think I'm really good at modeling imperfection. Like I don't mind falling flat on my face very publicly. As long as someone else can learn from my mistakes, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to put myself out there. I'm willing to fail brilliantly. It was something I would tell my students in my public speaking courses. Like, this is your laboratory to fail brilliantly, because this is a safe space to do it. I've just taken the world as my laboratory to make all the mistakes. So,
and every public speaker in the world falls from grace quite often.
Exactly.
We all do. All of us who do a lot of public work, we fall from grace quite often, and you learn from it, and you apologize for it or not, and you just move on. They're amazing gifts that you bring. In facing any of life's challenges, what helps you get through them?
A lot of coffee. I am a woman of simple pleasures. I like good food. I find that comforting. Good food, good coffee, good people. And
your puppy dog.
And my dog.
And your puppy dog.
I don't know, man. I have a retired racing greyhound who is a very, very anxious dog. And yeah, so we see each other. We see eye to eye when it comes to anxiety. But a good support system. So I recently came into some really difficult decisions that I'm having to make for the business. Spoiler alert, everything's turning out great. But I will tell you, the last 5 or 6 days have been some of the hardest as a business owner that I've ever had. And I have leaned into those around me. I've got a friend who is an executive leadership coach, and we're friends. She's never been my coach. But I said to her, I need to take from you. Yes. Can you gift me an hour of your coaching time? I said, I hope you're doing fine, but I'm not, and I need your wisdom. And she was so gracious and generous and did that, and it was so clarifying. And I think just knowing that those support systems are out there and being unafraid to ask, especially when everything hits the fan, which it felt like it did. And it's been really humbling to see how my support system has stepped up to actually do the physical and emotional supporting that I have required.
And is that about you realizing that you needed to tap into the wisdom of someone who would ask you some hard questions and give you the time to explore in a safe environment? And it's really about asking hard questions, coaching. I know that's how I spend most of my life these days, and it's asking the hard questions, and it's for people knowing when to reach out and ask, and just ask. I need some of your time, and I don't need you to be a friend right now. I need you to be a coach. So let's quarantine that time and get on with doing that piece, and not blend the two, because it's hard to blend the two. And that's really good advice, I think, to the people listening and watching today, Renee, is ask. Because as women, we don't always think to ask.
Oh, and I'm horrible at it. Like, I know, I know it is not a skill that I have to ask for help. I am going to muscle through it as much as I can. But yeah, I really needed it. And I wish I had done it sooner.
So as we get closer to wrapping up our lovely conversation today, how did you get that voice? What was it that caused you to have the voice you have today? And it's building in strength. It's already strong, and I see it building much more strongly in coming years as well. How do you get that? Because so many women ask me about, how do you get that self-confidence and self-belief to do that?
You know, it's funny. I don't see that in myself, but other people reflect that back to me, and I don't know. And so my answer is like, I genuinely don't care if other people are judging me. And I think that comes from a theater background. I think that comes from a public speaking background. And I also think that it comes from a women's college education, because studies have shown that in co-ed classrooms, the boys are more likely to raise their hand and be called on, and the girls kind of take a back seat. That doesn't happen. That dynamic is not there in a single sex classroom. So I think that, you know, I really kind of honed the skill of speaking up and speaking out. It was also a very conservative college that I went to, and I was one of the very few progressive politically leaning voices. And so I felt like I kind of had to stand up, because I was one of the onlys that was going to, you know, speak up for the left. But I think that as I'm 37 now, and I would say that in the last 5 years, I've really just stopped caring. If someone thinks, you know, you can't, no one's paying rent in my head except me. I'm not going to give energy to someone who is going to, you know, send nasty messages to me online, who doesn't really know who I am, because that's another thing that Brene Brown says, right? Is that there's a short list of people's whose opinions matter to you. Everything else, ignore it. And yeah, it's a very short list.
Another person's opinion of me is none of my business.
Amen.
Absolutely. What are you most proud of so far?
Ooh, I'm going to be unusually brief. In April of this year, Feminist Book Club won the Vision Award through Glenn Nelson Center and American Public Media. It was a $10,000 award awarded to a up and coming media company that has a bold vision to change the future of media. We were up against something like, oh gosh, I don't even know, several hundreds of other media companies across the country. And we won this award. And I can't take credit for it. It is my team of contributors, my team of writers and bloggers and podcasters that truly deserved it. And they all got raises. So I think that is what I am most proud of, just being able to kind of lead this team and accept that award on their behalf, because it was really truly about them.
Fabulous, and congratulations to you and your company, which is no longer a startup. You're in the real world, and yes. Well done. It's a fabulous achievement, and there'll be more awards coming your way in the media space with the changes you're making. So what's next for you?
I've got some things percolating that I actually can't talk about yet.
Oh, we'll have to wait and see.
Okay. So yes, wait and see. But all good things, all growth, all scary growth things.
So you're scaring yourself, are you?
Yes,
at this point?
Terrified, absolutely terrified. I'm waking up with butterflies in my stomach every morning.
So therefore, it's not often you see someone who's terrified with a smile as broad and wide as yours that invites people to come towards you. What are your closing thoughts for the the lovely people listening and watching today? What are your closing thoughts?
I think there is, oh, this sounds so cliche, but I'm going to go with it. I think there is nothing more rewarding than being uncomfortable and seeing it through. And that's not, I don't mean unhealthy or abusive spaces.
Mm,
I mean the challenge, seeing a challenge, dedicating yourself to that challenge, and meeting and exceeding
mm.
is worth every sleepless night. But take care of yourself. Take a nap, drink your water, go outside, take a walk, listen to an audiobook.
And
But challenge
take some
yourself.
downtime.
Yes,
And take some downtime.
absolutely.
Do
You
whatever it
cannot
is that
pour
you do.
from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself.
Absolutely. Renee, what a delight. What an absolute delight to have known you and work with you. And I'm just so thankful that the literature of people of all types, if I may say that, women, disability, diverse cultures, people of colour, people, queer people, whatever, whoever we are all in this world together, you're doing so much to get their voice through their literature heard and critiqued and talked about and published. So thank you. Zonta International thanks you greatly for your time and generosity and being part of this amazing series, The Remarkable Women, Powerful Stories. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been a long time fan of the work that Zonta does. One of my earliest mentors was a member of Zonta, and so I've always been just so appreciative of all the work that you do. So thank you for having me. I'm so grateful.